Hello again, and welcome back to Pirated Radio. In this episode, I speak to a gentleman called Javier. I won't even attempt to pronounce the all of his name because I simply can't. Um, who is a lecturer and a designer who runs a sort of workshop educational platform called Format XYZ. And we discuss a plethora of topics from education, influences, um, all different things. AI, as you could probably expect, it's a podcast in 2023. Um, and yeah, sorry, it's been a while since I last did one of these. I've been a little bit busy, hoping to do some more, sort of more regularly. Um, yeah, pretty much it. Enjoy. For the people listening that maybe don't know yourself, can you give them a bit of a rundown as to who you are and what you do?
My name is Javier Viramontes. I am a typographer, graphic designer, and educator, and I run a practice called Format.xyz. And Format is a platform that allows people to create things for both of subjective and objective value, which really means that, and I think it goes back into some of your other questions, is I never liked sending invoices to people or being that person as an independent designer. So I wanted a platform to kind of take my name out of the equation. And I've just enjoyed working with people more so than having my name be attached to something. So format can be a curatorial endeavor, a commercial endeavor, an artistic endeavor. So anything really.
I think it's more of a thing. I spoke to a few different people on the podcast with it now, and I've mentioned Virgil Abloh was a big kind of pioneer about kind of this idea of just molding all of the different disciplines into just one big, spaghetti mess thing. And I think that's the way that the industry's going in a way. Everybody kind of picks up everything now, don't they? Everybody does a bit of code, or they do a bit of web design, or they do a bit of visual stuff, or whatever.
There are no, I think standards are gonna going away. I hope education, it's hard to standardize that in a way in which universities can kind of manage that, because I think they're still, I mean, I don't operate that way, and I always hear about briefs about client designer relationships, and I've always thought those can change quite a bit. So how do you teach that? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Jumping back to the questions, so if you go back to rolling it back even before everything, when did things get started for yourself?
That's a great question, and I think this all started because I was a very strange child, in the sense that I would just stare at things and just listen and hear. And I remember staring at a particular logo. It was for J.C. Penney. If you are aware, it was designed by Massimo Vignelli, and it's not a particularly striking logo whatsoever. It's just Helvetica, but you just look at how the letter forms curve, how they end, the finality of it all. And I remember staring at it. Um, my father was also a math professor, so I think, must have been late 70s, early 80s books, math books. They had this modernist kind of aesthetic to them. And I think I remember this yellow and black one. Lots of negative space, some geometric shapes. And I think that those kinds of visuals just kind of permeated in my brain somewhere. But then, really, the love for typography and started with, I'm not sure if you know what a Barnes and Noble is.
I've heard of it vaguely.
It's a book retailer,
Yeah,
or like a bookstore, commercialized bookstore, and they hit you with a holistic aesthetic experience, if I were to describe it. And in fact, they make fun of it in this movie called You've Got Mail. It's not Barnes and Noble, but it's, I think, Fox Books, and they were talking about the destruction of small businesses, small bookstores, and their whole trick was to get them with the smell of their cappuccinos. But for a smaller city like mine, I think that kind of place, a big commercial bookstore, was one of the few places to get any sense of culture. So, um, my brother brought a calligraphy kit from Barnes and Noble. So, you have your retail space, and at the very end, you have a bunch of knickknacks as you wait in line to pay. And, that you have like a little Zen garden kit, cards, and, one of them was a calligraphy kit. And so I remember being very curious by it. And by the time I was in middle school, high school, actually, again, I'm not a very talkative person. You get to an age where you have to invite women to dances. That's part of the ritualized school experience. And I knew I wasn't particularly athletic or, of that sort. So I remember figuring out a way to, talk to this one girl. And so I was like, "Well, I'm going to learn calligraphy and I'm going to write her a letter." It's a little cringy if you speak about it now. But I do remember being extremely fascinated by the shapes. I was learning off of this book by a gentleman named David Harris, The Art of Calligraphy, who's actually British. And I was, most people are familiar with black letter, right? But there was this particular one, Fraktur, which is sort of the German version of it. And I remember just in the stroke of a pen of your hand, you could create a very elegant shape, and out of nothing there is meaning. And I remember just being fascinated by that moment. And so I think, I don't remember can't remember the outcome of that letter, but I do remember the love for the letter forms, and that's how it started, really.
Quite poetic in a way, isn't it?
Letters are certainly poetic.
Yeah. So yeah, jumping forward as far as I understand, and this is from just your LinkedIn. You studied at the University of Texas at Austin. Do you have any sort of formative memories from your education at all that began to shape you as a designer?
Oh, there are so many tied to that university. It is, they call it the Ivy League of public universities. Ivy League being these, very the private schools in the U.S. And um, it has the 10th biggest library system in the world, the University of Texas, and I think that came about through just the sheer amount of wealth that is in that particular state in the U.S., both in oil and other things. So it's a pretty well funded institution, um, which, I think for somebody who comes from West Texas, the desert, it was just impressive in all sorts of regards. And one of the things I particularly enjoyed was going to the library, the fine arts library, and just, yeah, I think this is pre the internet being a resource for that everybody uses. I think Tumblr was just beginning to be a huge thing. And so you just go walk around, and I remember finding a book by Joseph Mueller Brockman, Grid Systems, and I remember the program it was run by a set of amazing faculty, but they were all of the postmodern persuasion. They had gone to Cranbrook. You know, deconstruction was a huge thing, and it's a one. They're wonderful tools, but I remember being entirely confused by why why I needed to destroy everything and how to put it back together. They don't teach you how to put things back together. Uh, Maybe they intend you to, but I feel like from a pedagogical point of view, that's not very well communicated. And so I remember just looking at the book and somewhat absorbing something from it. I didn't need to look at, because that book is made at a time when people were setting things by hand, and so it's very highly technical. But just seeing the outcome of it, it was just entirely powerful. Also, the school is, and this is sort of where my trajectory as a type designer kind of started, was the Rob Roy Kelly wood type collection. Rob Roy Kelly was a very important design educator. I think was he started design pedagogy in the U.S. in many ways, and I think he brought in a lot of the modernist designers from Europe and established how design academia would run. But anyways, he was a collector of a lot of things. Amongst them was wood type. Um, and so I don't think he was part of the university, but his wood type collection ended up in one of the libraries within the University of Texas, and I believe they were going to be thrown away. But some brilliant educator decided not to, just to take him from that one particular library, and so it became part of the design department. It has its own room. At the time, it was being when I was there, it was under the custody of a gentleman named David Shields, which is an amazing scholar and design educator. And so I remember going to school or looking at the website. I forget what it was, and just having the desire to look at these very strange letter forms. And the wood type is from the 19th century, which um, it has all these, very odd decisions. These were type that were made to scream for attention, right? And so when you're used to type from a computer, that's all kind of vanilla, very demure. Seeing such odd, funny decisions was just kind of a fresh of breath air. It was like seeing foreign writing, like a Martian's writing. And the beautiful thing about this collection was that anybody could use it, right? You could just express interest, and you would be able to go and print something from movable type. So that is kind of what I've been trying to replicate, that experience of printing something. Is you can't find a wood type collection in every university in the entire U.S. in all of the so it's something that I think it's very important. It's tactile, it's sensory. You smell it, you see it, you feel it, you reflect on it, and it becomes a very holistic experience.
I was going to follow up on that, but you've kind of answered it. But I think a question that's come to mind to me is, you mentioned sort of having these spaces to be able to look at these sort of artifacts of design, and they're few and far between, aren't they, in the way? Do you think that's something that may get lost even more going forwards, where we'll sort of lose all of the old wood type and the old mechanisms and different things?
You know, there are there's never anything absolute, in the sense that craft will be lost or that AI will take over the world. Um, and I think, I'm not sure it was you, but I think I was saying that there are as many typefaces as there are people in this world, right? So if somebody wants to make design with their hands, there'll be space for it. If somebody wants to use AI for design, there'll be the space for it. Certainly, some kinds of design will be incentivized by industry, by the schools, but there's always the niche aspect of it. You know, I think we have such a pluralistic society these days that I think you could make a career out of doing things by hand. One great example is Daffy Kuhn, who, you know, is like, I'm just in awe of his practice. Um, and you know, there's a huge public for it. And you know, when something moves towards this particular direction, you will see the difference and desire the handmade. You know, William Morris. You know, he was responding to the Industrial Revolution. You know, and the arts and crafts movement was born. And so, you know, there's a action, there's a reaction. There is no complete take. You know, people still listen to records, vinyl records. Right? That hasn't gone. But yeah, and when it's funny enough, like I was listening to this AI uh, fiction of a song. It was it's like it was a Biggie song sung by Kanye West, and it was quite convincing. And you know, I feel like there's room for that too. You know.
Doobie doobie doobie. So yeah, jumping forward, getting back on sort of the timeline now, jumping forward and jumping past where you graduated, and you mentioned that you founded your own practice. I believe you had a couple of different jobs, and then eventually you founded your own practice, Format XYZ. And you mentioned it a little bit, and I think I am correct in this. When I was looking at your website and sort of reading through different things, there seems like there's two goals with it ultimately: educating people, and you did touch on it, but sort of democratizing design of sorts and giving it out to the people, you know, bringing it down some sort of this pedestal almost and then giving it out to the masses a little bit. Can you expand on that a little bit more at all? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is a massive place, and so certain places don't have access to certain things. The socioeconomic spectrum is huge as is the country. So I remember in El Paso, Texas, so it was far west between Mexico, Texas, and New Mexico. So geographically, if you can put those three things together, maybe Google that. Whoever's listening to is um, there isn't much in the sense of culture, and I think bookstores were a huge aspect to getting culture. Again, the internet doesn't exist at this point. It does, but it's not what it is today. And so, being in a physical space with books about painting, about contemporary painting, it was just like being on a psychedelic trip almost. And so, not having access to something while hungering for it was this crazy thing to me. When I moved to New York, I went to the Type of Cooper program to study type design. They have this place called Llewellyn Archive, which is a wonderful collection of typographic ephemera. Um, and I remember just being so in awe of all the things that I didn't get in undergrad, all the reference, all the modernist design, and that they that collection had it all. That was another one of those huge moments where it was. I wish everybody had that experience. You know, so I think format came after my life in advertising and tech, um, and it was. I think my desire was to replicate these very important experiences that I had with objects. And so one of the first things we did as format, it was myself and my then partner, Karina Eckmeyer. We set up this letterpress operation in the hallway of our Brooklyn apartment. If you can picture these New York apartments, they're not very big. You know, you might be deluded by Friends, perhaps the show, the sitcom, but in reality, these places are very tiny, and so um, it's funny that people live in these places, these very compact living situations. Yet you go to the Hauser and Wirth Gallery, or some the MoMA, Guggenheim, and just the world is there. Um, and it's a huge contrast. So I think the impetus was to bring some of that uh, artistic experience into my home, our hallway. And so what we would do is cook for people while they came. And so the running joke, the serious but running joke, was that it was the shortest residency in the U.S. So in the span of an evening, you had access to a letterpress, uh, a small Proxen table saw, which is used for model making, slabs of maple, pieces of acrylic, and so in within the span of a cooked meal, you would make a print. But it turned out that we also made them a drink, and this menu was designed for the person. So we ended up having a really fun experience doing that, and I think one of the greatest things that I observed was everybody's workflow. You know, you're put into this high pressure microcosm that's both physically and formally limiting, and so everybody took the challenge very differently. And so that was a super interesting behavioral observation, ethnographic observation. So out of that, I think format developed into this platform to help people kind of create their vision, right? So because it's not, it starts becoming about yourself. Like you have to put your name out there, you have to schmooze. It's just things for an introverted person or can be quite tiring. So the goal was to uh, put the attention on somebody else, on the people you're collaborating with, and all of these collaborations have been extremely intimate. And that's why I think I mentioned earlier in the interview is that it's human activity. I know you've had an amazing cast of people in your podcast, but growing up, I was always curious about what do these people do when they're not being these big designers. I forget what artist. I think Paul Clay, but I'm not sure. I forget. He was. We don't know like the specifics of, for example, Van Gogh or Monet, but I think somebody's gonna know who it was. He kept very detailed record of his purchases. Like he like had a note of how much a pencil cost him. And I found that to be so fascinating. But anyways, um, in the grandiosity of these people's lives, I think you end up losing the individual, who they are, their flaws. So I like to work in that scale and the very intimate.
So yeah, just sort of jumping forward but backward at the same time, I guess. Um, you obviously mentioned that you've been a lecturer for a number of years now. What got you into education to begin with?
Um, my father, I think I didn't plan for it, but um, there are four generations of educators in my family. So that would be my great grandfather. But anyways, I remember having a conversation with one of my dear undergrad friends named Aham Growie, and I think he's at Yale at the moment. But he was teaching at the University of New Haven in Connecticut, and we had he was about to go to their MFA program, and he told me, "Hey, I'm leaving. I know you've expressed a desire to teach. Would you want to teach a course?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so he put me in touch with somebody, and that's how it started. Which was pedagogy is super interesting because that's where you get to. I think it's more about human beings and their problems, mental problems, than it is about design. Which, if you think about it, that's a client relationship, right? It's not really the design itself, but about the person who you're trying to sell this to. And so I don't know. I'm super fascinated by that.
Would you dive into sort of, I guess what you're talking about in a way is psychology? Would you dive into that more as a specific thing in itself in the future, maybe, or anything like that?
Well, that's what format does a lot is whatever collaboration format undertakes. You have to understand the psychology of the person, what they want, what they're trying to create. Um, and again, I don't want to put it in a formula, right? Because I think that takes the humanity out of it. It takes out the mystery of people. So just having a friendship, really. It's if you think about all these modernist painters, um, I don't know. I'm sure Van Gogh was a recluse. He wasn't trying to. I don't think he was particularly good at schmoozing or working the gallery system. He was just going about his life, and maybe it drove him to his end. But that's why you have such a wonderful legacy. He was just being human.
Do you have you mentioned art a few times. Do you have like a favorite artist painting? You know what I mean?
Oh my goodness, so many. But I think Goya is the ultimate painter. And it's you have the what do you call it? But the benefactor system, in Europe, through huge institutions, and that that's really wonderful. It's created some of the most lasting ways of thinking. But I think Goya kind of was one of the biggest cracks in that system. And I'm not advocating for the destruction of any particular system, but you could see his commentary very well. I think there's many instances where I think his Follies, his print series, you just see this very ambiguous commentary on society and art, and I don't think it was so blatant before him. I'm sure there is. I'm not an art historian, but you could really see the transformation, and then in the Prado Museum, you have his this dark paintings. Those are extremely powerful. There's a darkness to it. There's the masterful treatment of paint that you just kind of envelop yourself. And then the Prado did a wonderful job putting that room together where those paintings are. Um,
Jumping away from art and back to sort of education, I assume you've looked at a lot of different student portfolios while you've been an educator. What do you think makes a good portfolio for yourself?
um, I think that will depend on. It's a very big question. Certainly, industry wants certain things. Right now, if you need a job, it's a UI UX job. So schools do a wonderful job at doing that. They churn out projects left and right. Fake clients or whatnot. But I've done these review events. I remember being at the University of Connecticut for AIGA's portfolio review. And the first time I did it, a student came up to me and he had the most wonderful portfolio. You know, meticulously executed, beautiful typography. Just you he could be working anywhere, and I would have been fooled. Then the next student comes in, and it's the same thing. Like, oh, this is amazing, awesome. They're I don't know what they're feeding these kids. Like, it's awesome. Third, it's the same thing. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and then it switches to another school, another university, and again, it's the same thing. It's like, "Whoa, this is a magnificent portfolio, brilliant concepts," but it's the same project and the same line of thinking, dozens of times. And so I think the best work, the best portfolios are those that don't have school as kind of their center. Portfolios that have real curiosity, right? Where it's not about this corporate plain sign system. It's I don't know. It's about some particular idiosyncratic observation that they made, or just when students freelance and they put that in their portfolio. I think that's wildly fascinating, and that's how I started my career. Was not even for my design work, but it was because I met my then chief creative officer Sergio Alcocer at a Joanna Newsom concert, and I had some watercolors that I was gonna give to Joanna Newsom, and he was a lover of music, and I was a lover of art and music, and so I think that little gesture was more powerful than any concept in advertising could have been. So it's the human element, right?
I've heard that. I've heard that a few times, and I've asked people. It's a lot more blunt way of putting it, but it's sort of like you could be the best designer in the world, but and it's kind of different to what you're saying. But if you're a dickhead, you're just a dickhead, aren't you? Ultimately, you could be Paul Shear or you could be whoever you want. But if you just you're a dickhead, you don't want to work with dickheads, do you? Ultimately, so
Yeah, and I think certain places can foment some of that, and you'll have a lot of magnificent work come out of a city. But in the end, they're just dicks.
do you think do you think you can see through sort of because I think you can put on a facade very easily with that kind of thing, and I think it's a lot of the time you can kind of see through it. Do you think it's easy to see through things like that in sort of an educator or somebody that's sort of employing for industry at all?
Well, when you have a conversation with people, you quickly realize what they're interested in, or what they know and what they don't know. And we're all ignorant in whatever regard, but it's how you manage the exchange of information that really gives you an understanding of a person, of what they can do and what they can't do. One of the biggest shocks in my life was coming from this magnificent university and moving to New York. And I remember every design person that I met came off of a portfolio based school. And I just couldn't have any authentic conversation about design, art, the world, politics, poetry. I think there's that quote by Experimental Jet Set from their monograph. Modern graphic design comes from the intersection of poetry, politics, art, and technology. So I feel like, yeah, you might have an amazing portfolio, but if you've never watched a film, then I don't know. It just seems a little empty. I don't know if I answered that question well.
No, I think you did. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have this thing that I ask every person on the podcast now. I didn't at first, and then I sort of brought it in as it went on a little bit, and I call it the Hall of Fame. And essentially the question of if you're in a lift, I don't know why it's a lift, but let's imagine we're in a lift, and I ask you if there's one thing that I can go away from this lift and research and look up on the internet or in books or whatever, that has been sort of the real heartbeat of your own career that sort of launched you into what you are today. What do you think that would be for yourself?
Lack of access to things. Now that I didn't really have a good answer, but I think based on our conversation, um, I think if evolution happens when um, there is a strain in the resources of a particular group, um, and so I think limitation. I don't know how you recreate that for a student, for other people, but I think that really forces you to contend with what you have and what you can make. If you have access to everything, then you really don't have much. Oh, you don't have a voice. And I think that's something I've looked at with students nowadays. Is I've been working with this really amazing designer student, and she makes the super awesome videos. Um, and it's been interesting to learn about a demographic that has no connection to old media. And old media, I don't know how old you are, but from VHS to DVD, from VHS to what's now, how we absorb media, there's like a huge rift, you know, and so a lot of the references that you see for these TikTok trends, music choices, come from film. Uh, Most recently, Wes Anderson, right? Um, and though you don't necessarily need a reference or understand a reference to create great work, as the natural his I'm not a historian, but I like history a lot. It kind of saddens me that people will not have those access or knowledge about the past. But that's with everything, you know. I was just recently thinking about Pugin, the British architect, how he was yearning for the Gothic, and he looked at the Victorian with such disdain, and like, could we build with that much greatness, with that much spirit again? Probably not. Certainly, and he was right. It's a reflection of a society and its values, but um, you know, things change.
So yeah, we have touched on this a little bit, but when we first began talking, it was on the back of the Joseph Mueller Brockman podcast that I did a little while ago because you were the person that got the lecture uploaded to YouTube originally that I ripped off in a sense for the podcast. And again, if I'd have known, I'd have contacted yourself. um, but yeah, we had sort of little bits of conversations now on Instagram, sort of things about sort of the future of the industry, and I wanted to ask what you think, where are things going to go from here?
I mean, first of all, I want to say um, an amazing job with that podcast. Um, that is exactly what these tools are good for, sparking the imagination. That's why I even looked for this video recording. He Joseph Mueller Brockman died in 1996, right? And you have recordings of Paul Rand, you have recordings of Saul Bass, you have recordings of all the greats, but it's like there is no, or at least maybe there are now. I'm not sure. I don't think there are any interviews with Joseph Mueller Brockman, and I think that speaks to his who he was. I don't think he was such a super flashy guy. Maybe he had a big ego, but not I don't know. Somebody can answer this better. But anyways, um, we were talking about how these people are in real life, what makes them who they are, and so I wanted to answer that question. Um, and if I were a kid just starting to learn about graphic design and I saw Joseph Mueller Brockman's grid systems, the podcast you have now is like would have been such a helpful tool. I would have just been so curious by it. And so again, we shouldn't treat these technologies with fear. They will certainly displace us in many ways, but I think humans can still make or do things that computers can't. I worked at a company where we try to replicate human handwriting robotically, and it was just so hard. Like you don't really think of the mechanics of writing as being that important, or the mechanics of making a note for somebody as being anything to think about or break down. But um, it was so hard for these machines to accomplish this. And you still have, the human body is a machine design that's been designed to do everything, and it's had millions of years to get to this point. And I still think um, we can do more than machines. Different things. And all those AI things are a result of what's out there already. So you're not, in essence, creating anything new. You're just remixing things.
I think as well, touching on what you mentioned about kind of, sort of the amalgamation of all the different arts and cultures and things. I don't think an AI would ever be able to get that. I don't think they'd be able to appreciate like, a piece of music in the way that a human can, and sort of listen to it and take away from it and such and such. And, maybe you've got a link from, as you said, a Wes Anderson film, and then you connect it to a piece of music and you spawn a design from that. Can an AI do that? I don't know. Will it ever be able to do that? Again, I don't know. I don't think it will, but who knows?
And you say this in in the end, it's people putting these prompts in the computer. It's the software and the engineer who wrote the code to make this happen. So maybe the artists are not, or the designers are not us, but you know, a computer engineer. They're the artists now. And so I think the Dutch do this very well. I think Python was invented or written by a gentleman whose brother is a huge person in the type industry. And so I think more and more code should be included in education and in design. But again, yeah, it's humans doing the work.
Yeah. When I talk to my lecturer, is quite interested in the guy that runs my university course. Well, he runs the undergraduate and not the postgraduate, but his name's John, and he I think he sees sort of the internet and AI and everything. It's quite a threat to education. Would you see it as the opposite then? Do you see it as kind of an aid almost?
Um, Again, it's about how people will perceive it and what they do with it. Um, it technology displaces people. So there's a lot of effort put into playing the academia game. Um, and I think we have to differentiate between the kinds of institutions that teach design. There's a wide breadth of different kinds of approaches to design education. All of them have a place and a time. I'm speaking particularly about this R research R1 school that I work at. where it's still tied to the sciences, right? That's like their main way of operating. And I think this sort of institution, the way it works, it functions around these formats. And so as te- as inflation goes up, as the coins instability, war happens, like people are not going to have the opportunity to learn, especially in the US, right, by dishing out thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a degree. And it'll be in these kinds of places. Now, I feel like you could adopt and learn a lot from platforms, open source platforms like this. And I think that's where Format is right now, is in creating these open source platforms for people, right? And to the amount of detail that an archive or a platform has, that's really up to the creator of that platform. Um, Recently, I was made aware of this site called the People's Archive, which holds like alternate design histories, right? Um, which is super interesting. The Llewellyn Center has Flat File, which was, I think they've stopped doing it, but it was an effort to bring some of their archive to a bigger audience. Um, and again, how many people will go to New York, go to this tiny room in this institution and look at Joseph Mueller Brockman's Helvetica type specimen? A handful. But how many people will listen to your podcast and hear Joseph Mueller Brockman speak? You know, hundreds of people will. So it's about reach, it's about detail, it's about intention.
Yeah, so beginning to sort of round off, and again, I asked all my guests the same question, sort of leading out of the podcast. But if you could go back in time and give yourself, it's really cliche, but if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice when you first got started, knowing what you know now, what would that be for yourself?
I would say watch movies. And maybe we can't. Movies today are different than. They're still great movies, but what is readily available is maybe different. But from a piece of graphic design, as a piece of communication, a movie is a great analogy to graphic design. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's a middle. There's things that need to be communicated, things that don't need to be communicated. There are visual images, there are words, and there are other mediums involved, right? Music, special effects, technology, and so especially today now, it's like the moving poster is becoming quite a thing. Um, the reels on Instagram or TikTok or whatever platform has copied that format. Um, is becoming a very important thing for communication. So, but I think when you have the time, budget, liberty of a great film, like all those ingredients put together into one object, there's a lot that you can learn from it. I would say watch Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, and then super, super, super lastly, where can people find yourself online?
Um, you can go to Instagram, which has become kind of my main repository of work, just because it's super quick and immediate. Uh, uh, Format underscore XYZ. You can also go to www.format.xyz and you can download the plans for a DIY letterpress. That's what's taken over my personal site.
No, that's all good then. Hello. I hope you enjoyed that. How do we even outro these? I can't remember. It's been that long. Um, yeah, if you want to find myself online, I'm pirating material everywhere you can find me. Sounds like a challenge of some sort. Um, yeah, and I will see you next time. Whether that'll be in a month or 6, I don't know. See ya.